Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for EEA's Enterprise Blockchain in 2022 for Supply and Financial Services webinar. Today's call is being recorded and will be available to all attendees and the public on the EEA YouTube channel soon after today's presentation. The Enterprise Ethereum Alliance enables organizations to adopt and use Ethereum technology in their daily business operations. The EEA empowers the Ethereum ecosystem to develop new business opportunities, drive industry adoption, and learn and collaborate with one another. We welcome any and everyone to join and become a part of our global community. At this time, we are pleased to introduce our moderator, Nico Casagrande.
Yeah, welcome everybody to this Enterprise Ethereum Alliance call. My name is Nico Casagrande, and I'm the co-chair of the Financial Services Interest Group and also the DeFi Interest Group here at the EEA. And I'm joined by John Ho, who co-chairs those groups. And today, we're pleased to be hosting two great guest speakers. We have Jason Anderson, who previously led the team building Azure Blockchain Service at Microsoft, and then brought blockchain capabilities to the traditional database market with Azure SQL Database Ledger. And Jason is now at ConsenSys, and he's leading product for Quorum Blockchain Service. And I'd also like to introduce Mark McCurry, who also has experience at Microsoft launching several Azure Blockchain Platform as a Service offerings. And he's now with ConsenSys leading the Quorum Blockchain Service business unit. And today, Jason and Mark will share some lessons learned regarding Quorum deployment, integration. They'll give us a preview of the Quorum Blockchain Service platform and how it can help take the pain out of network governance and management. So please put any of your questions into the Zoom Q&A window. And gentlemen, thank you very much for being here today. We're looking forward to diving in. Over to you.
Thanks, Nico. And thank you everyone joining. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are in the world. As Nico just mentioned, my name is Mark McCurry. I lead the developers effort at ConsenSys, which includes Infura and QBS and Truffle and Diligence. So bringing all this together, it's something we call Developers United. And so really excited today to talk to you about the enterprise space. What I'd like to do is sort of walk through some of the things that we've seen change. As Nico mentioned, Jason and I have been in the space for a while. And one of the exciting things about 2022 is I think, you know, what a few years ago was fear of the unknown has moved to fear of missing out. And so I know when I went on the holiday break, I got my tickets to go see the new Spider-Man movie, and I got my free Spider-Man NFT. I saw the new South Park special that was on over the holiday break, and that had someone about NFTs. And so NFTs have really helped mainstream and bring crypto to the masses. And so we're seeing some really interesting scenarios emerge over the next 12 months. And so one is, as I was just talking about, so digital assets have really reached their mainstream moment, right? You see lots of companies that are adding cryptocurrency, DeFi, and digital assets to their portfolio. We see lots and lots of people launching NFTs and investing in the metaverse, and really just seeing significant investment in the space. We're seeing lots of new opportunities for banks and fintechs, whether it's customer acquisition, customer engagement, or new revenue streams. Really seeing a number of opportunities that are there in things that are relevant to your business, and also some new considerations. When we talk about custody, how does custody evolve to look at things like CryptoPunks and high value NFTs, and it could be worth with 7 figures or more. The other thing is, how do you look at income when your income in Asia, like in the Philippines, could be quite high, but really is based on play to earn mechanics inside of a game like Axie Infinity, its digital currency. And so looking at in multiple ways that digital assets will bring new revenue streams, new opportunities, and also, not addressing these things will open up opportunities for competitors. And then we're not here just to talk about fintech, but also about supply chain. And so this is the slide that Jason and I used a few years ago. It's like, what if you could have one trusted, transparent, immutable record of truth between all participants in a transaction and across organizations? And if we talk about this, this is not a new thing for supply chain and wanting to get supply chain transparency. It's, in that scenario, I want to track a number of things. It might be parts or products or equipment or people or partners or payments or a combination of those things. But for both, people in the supply chain business as well as financial services, and quite frankly, any business, supply chain and what that means really is evolving in 2022. We live in a world where we make decisions based on what we see or the data that we process. And so each of those things are going to have their own, and they do have their own supply chains today, and we need to pay more attention to them. Is this image that I see in this news publication actually what I think it is? Has it been tampered with? And is it actually related to the event that I'm seeing? Is this video real, or is it a deep fake? And that can cause stock prices to fall, as well as riots and things like that in political situations. Similarly with documents, is this a document that we believe to be true, or has that been tampered with? And CAD and 3D files, we see, when I've talked to folks personally about scenarios where they believe like localized 3D printing is super important, and how do you do that in a way where you can handle tokenization of the asset, as well as the number of times it can be used. But then we also have folks in military purposes. Listen, I'm on an aircraft carrier in the middle of the ocean. I need a part for my plane. I'd like to be able to print that as well. And I need to make sure that the file that has been sent to me has not been tampered with by a rogue nation. It might impact my thing. And so really looking at that supply chain for media that comes through, but also for data. Think about your businesses today, in any business. There is some analysis that's going on that's helping direct a decision you're going to make. And it could be whether you buy or sell. It could impact in a drone strike. It could impact any number of things, improving someone's loans or something like that. But the reality is it's based on data. But data isn't just data, is it? You have data coming today. Data comes from multiple sources, from multiple places. It's transformed. It's generated into new forms of data that are then gone ahead and merged for. And so one of the things when we sort of look at data isn't in fact its own supply chain. And just as if people tamper with something in the supply chain, it can have negative effects for individuals or businesses, the same thing can happen with data. Similarly with software. Unfortunately, from individual companies to the largest cloud providers, we've seen scenarios where software and configuration information has been tampered with. And we've seen how fragile software supply chains can be. And so making sure that we understand and take some of the things that we've looked at for traditional supply chain and take them to these new areas. And so if we're looking at an asset, the questions we're asking is, what is it, or what's in it? Where is it? Who has it? Is it real? Has it been tampered with? How did it get here? How was it delivered? What was it delivered in? Who participated in the delivery? Were the transport conditions okay? And so, before I might have been checking to see if this was in a refrigerated truck when a good was being delivered. But now I'm going to look at, how was this transported? Was it transported over secure channels and things like that, encrypted channels? And then if there's a question about this, how do we handle disputes about what may be real? And then if I look at data, what is the data and what is the model, and where was it run, and when was it run, and who was it run by, and what was the result? And so really being able to have that full lineage of what I have. And so the trust and transparency that we've seen over the past several years really being applied to, the supply chain of physical goods now being translated to the digital world. Now, what we see at ConsenSys right now is a fairly broad spectrum in the enterprise space in terms of interest. And so that's ranging from institutional demand to folks that want to participate in the metaverse. And so whether you're looking at global trade or asset management or institutional capital markets, payments and money, and now we're starting moving over to, one of the things that we've definitely seen with the growth of cryptos is DeFi enablement. The option of, when Jason and I started this, we had folks that many enterprise customers looked at what was happening on public blockchains is the Wild West. And now that fear of the unknown is now fear of missing out, right? And so we see organizations going there, whether they believe and are leaning in because they see that's the future of their business, or because they know that if they don't do that, their current business is in jeopardy because there's so much demand and interest from the customers that are there. Gaming, we're seeing digital assets in gaming, whether they're NFTs that people are earning as a result of things that happen inside of gameplay, play to earn, and new models that are emerging there every day, which are quite fascinating, and enterprise want to understand how they can play in that space. And then you've got the NFT platforms in the metaverse, right? And so whether it's digital collectibles for IP owners in sports leagues, or people setting up shop in with digital real estate in places like Decentraland and things like that, there really is this broad set of demand from folks about how they participate and how we can help. Now, the other thing is that with it becoming mainstream, it's the age-old integration that you're probably all familiar with is integration. How do I take this new thing? How do I take blockchain technology, whether it's public or private, and we'll talk more about that or public permission, and how do I connect that to the things that I have? And so we're going to show you demos here. Actually, a lot of people at ConsenSys haven't seen this yet, so this is sort of a world premiere. What we found is that people consistently needed to connect to popular SaaS, to services, and to data. And that could also help them not only solve the problem, some of the problems we just talked about, but also integrate with their first-party systems as well as do really interesting things. So for Creative Cloud, when someone uploaded something to their Creative Cloud account, they could use what I'm about to show you and automatically generate an NFT. Or if a database had an entry that was added, they can go ahead and track that to the NFT. Or if a file was added to OneDrive or Box or G Drive or those sorts of things, similarly, those files could be hashed and have those contents put on side of the chain. And even notifications could be used with Twilio to send SMS or even interactive phone calls and things like that. And so the approach we're talking about here is the use of connectors. And so today we're going to show you something that is coming very soon from ConsenSys. It is a connector. We'll show you it running inside of the Microsoft environment today. This is our first connector. And what this does, it allows you to have a set of activities related to smart contracts that you'll be able to tie together with events happening in other places, right? And so what we can do is if something happens on a blockchain, and that's whether it's Quorum that you run yourself in our case, or Quorum Blockchain Service, adjacent service, or Infura, that's going to enable you to react and then take action. Similarly, if a contract changes, it can trigger notifications. And so you could have it send an SMS or a voice or an email or even a Slack message if that's something you wanted. With the other connectors, you can connect this up to. Or when something happens in a database or Salesforce or Office or G Suite or Stripe or anything like that, it's going to have an interaction with the blockchain as well. And so something can happen someplace else, and it can trigger something to happen on the blockchain. Alternatively, something up on the blockchain can trigger an action that happens there as well. So we've, in the total cooking show style, I've sort of prepared some things here so we could take a look at that. 1 second here. And so what you see here, I'm going to show you two examples here. One is in Microsoft Azure, which is for pro code developers. And then we also will show you how that works in low code. And so how you can bring this to people inside of your enterprise. Because the other thing that we understand in 2022, it's hard to hire people, right? You've got the great resignation going on for blockchain talent. It's in high demand. And so it's one of the things like, how do I participate in this world with the existing developers that I have and the existing skill sets that I have? And with blockchain particularly, because a lot of what we talk about really is about business value and about reinventing business models. The ability that we help people that are in the business roles to develop things with low code and no code, we think there's going to be more innovation in the space as well. So here you can see this is a design surface. And so if I clicked on, this is a trigger. So this is saying when an HTTP request is received. But this could be, if we go back to the slide I had here, this could be when a Slack message was received, or when a Stripe payment was sent, or when something was changed in a database in AWS or Azure or things like that. And so when that happens, what I want to do is I want to be able to go ahead and query a smart contract. And then I might also want to get contract state. And so this is something that one of the folks on our team, Juan, sort of put this one together for us. Now, this is a bit messy. This is your contract ABI. And so you just sort of paste in the contract ABI for the contract you want to monitor. In this case, we're monitoring a specific contract address. We want to look at a specific smart contract address, and we want to, and so when we provide the ABI, what it does is it dynamically shows all the the functions and parameters that are available for us. And so here, the function name I'm going to do is just called balance of for this particular account. Okay. And then I can also get the smart contract state. And so here I'm going to put in the ABI, and this is a cut and paste. You don't need to type any of this in. And then I can also look at that for the smart contract address. And so whenever this HTTP request is received, it's going to go ahead and send this. So I can make this a web service. Ultimately, it can happen with any of those things, like when a database is changed. And so let me show you what this looks like when it's run. And so this is just looking at a previous run that happened. And you can see here that I went ahead and provided this information, and then I got the output from this that I can use in logic. And so this design service allows me to do like if this, then that, if you're familiar with that. So I can do branching logic and execute code and things like that. And then here, I've gone ahead and went to get the state, and you can see here that I've got like the time between mints, the mint cap, minting allowed after, the name. This happens to be Uniswap token, a uni, and then the total supply. But I'm able to go ahead and interact with that. And this is using Infura, which is connecting up to the public network. But this works with any of the systems that we talked about a moment ago. Now, the other thing that I want to show you is that that same connector that we use also works in that low code, no code environment. And so we've created this little Infura bot here. If you were to click on that, that opens up something called Power Virtual Agents. And so here, a business person, and so you can create that same flow that we did there in this environment as well. But you can also tie it together to things like Power Apps, which are low code, no code apps. You can also tie it into a chatbot that you can run inside of Power Apps. You can put it in your website or other things like that. Also integrate it with Slack and whatnot. And so here's a pretty simple one. And so this is using a lightweight contract that we have where it's a marketplace contract. And think of it almost like an eBay type thing where I can list an item and people can bid on that item that's there. And so here I can just say, hey, in the chatbot, I want to say, hey, if someone says I want to sell an item or just type sell an item, it's one of these sort of trigger phrases. It's going to go ahead and cause the bot to interact in a particular way. That indicates there's a topic that someone wants to talk about. It's here. And you can see here that this sort of controls the dialogue. And so if I say I want to sell an item, well, the bot is going to come back and says, welcome to the ConsenSys Marketplace bot. And like, hey, what's the description of what you want to sell? And it's going to save that in a variable. And what's the list price for that? And then once it does that, it's going to take an action. And guess what? That action for this chatbot uses effectively the same functionality as what you just saw in the connector in the other place. And so here it says, hey, we're going to give you the description and the price. In this case, I'm just using a marketplace contract that will take that and then put it out. And then the output of that, and I can bind here. So I can easily just sort of select the output of this in here and say, okay, what I want you to do is return back to the chatbot, the smart contract address and that transaction hash. Now it can optionally save this to a database and things like that. So we can do lookups and data binding and our Power Apps and things like that. Then it's going to come back and it'll just say, hey, I can confirm that the item has been listed on the network. It'll give you that information that we just saw, which is smart contract address and the transaction hash. But what you're seeing here is that, not only is this becoming mainstream in terms of the scenarios and the interest, but one of the things we're doing at ConsenSys is trying to bring this to as broad an audience as possible and really help redefine, what a blockchain developer is, which I think is going to be incredibly important in the enterprise space. Now, the key thing here is that when you go to this new world with all these new opportunities, there are a number of considerations. And this will help determine what historically has been either a public permissionless network like Ethereum mainnet, or a private permission network, something like Quorum or Quorum Blockchain Service. And we actually see opportunities for public permission networks, which will be in between, which we'll probably talk about in a follow-on discussion with the EA. But what are the things that you want to think about as you're looking at these things? Well, the things that we've heard from customers as they try to figure out which chains they should deploy onto is they need to have control over identity. And this is for one of two reasons. One is they have a scenario such as KYC, or know your customer, where they need to know who they're doing business with. The other scenario is in a permissionless network, anyone can participate, and that can include bad actors. And so there's a number of things where a company will say, hey, you know what? If there are terrorists or other people doing that, even if it's a very small minority of what's on the network, if that goes through a node that we own, like what's our liability for that? We don't really know. That's a problem for us. We don't want to move forward. but largely it's going to be on that KYC side. But that identity is a problem for them. Performance, like, hey, I have X amount of transactions per second that I need to go and land. I need to be able to do that. Similarly, there are some compliance considerations about perhaps where this can run, or and it could be also geography is listed here, but also it could be what are they SOC compliant, SOC 1 or SOC 2 compliant, that sort of thing, where it's being run. Privacy, ability to do private transactions, and then cost, and this often is tied to the gas fees. And what you're seeing here is that for many of these things, you're seeing layer 2 networks are spinning up to address things like performance and cost, and sometimes also geography. But then you're also seeing people move to private networks today, private permission networks, and we do see public permission networks coming forward. And the thing is that if you've not seen it, I would encourage you to read a blog by a synonymous person named Paulinaya, where they talk about this future of one of multiple connected and layered chains. And we believe that to be true. And if you listen to Gartner, and I know a lot of folks in the enterprise definitely do, they project by 2023, 35% of enterprise blockchain applications will integrate with decentralized applications and services. The rewards are simply too high to ignore and far greater than the cost. And so what historically may have been private or public is going to be a combination of private permissioned, public permissionless networks that are connected together with technology such as bridges, or being enabled with technology like rollups. Now, if you look at where Jason and I are from, we're from ConsenSys. We are focusing on a stack that enables people sort of to develop for this world. No matter where they want to plug in, we invest at the protocol level in things like Teku and Besu. We're also investing in services, whether it's Quorum Blockchain Service or Infura, to connect up to mainnet. We're also understanding, like, especially in financial services, and everybody deals with payments, really having financial primitives and middleware that really make sense for folks, whether they're doing assets and payments, looking at staking or compliance, or even digital collectibles. And then we've got our Truffle suite for if you want to develop, test, debug, and deploy smart contracts, diligence, be able to fuzz those, do fuzzing and make sure those contracts are secure. And then of course we've got MetaMask and MetaMask Institutional, which adds institutional controls, which is the world's leading wallet. I was going to say it's over 30 million MAU. It's growing so quickly I don't have the latest counts, but it's definitely over 30 million. But really, it brings together everything you need to plug in wherever you want. And now you have things like the connector that's making it very easy for even more people to participate. So with that, what I'd like to do is turn it over to Jason, who's going to tell you a little bit about Quorum Blockchain Service and how the combination of Quorum Blockchain Service, we call it QBS, Truffle, which you can use to author and test your smart contracts just mentioned, as well as connectors and a dev kit that will be launching soon, can really help you focus on the three things that matter most, which are launch and manage the network, model smart contracts, and build and extend the application when you're building your own enterprise networks. Jason?
Thanks, Mark. Could you go to the next slide? Yeah, thank you. All right. So, so if we start with the element is the previous slide that Mark talked about really talks about a journey, right? About launching and managing the network, modeling the smart contracts, and then extending the application. And Mark kind of dove in a little bit around what that looks like. How do you use things such as connectors to be able to extend and integrate across other SaaS services, data services, connecting to eventing, et cetera, right? But really, at the end of the day, if you look at the enterprise space and what enterprise networks are doing and what's needed there, what Mark and I learned over the past number of years, and we've all been a part of this journey together if you've been in the EEA for a while, is building these private permission networks is really challenging, right? And it's really challenging on two axes. The first is around the technology side, just standing the network up itself, being able to not only just manage that stack, but really by the definition of blockchain being decentralized, every party that's participating in that network, those nodes, those members need to be connected together to be a part of the same chain, right? And that really gets complex as you're talking about different enterprises, different entities that have different hosting environments potentially, and being able to then interconnect that physical infrastructure together, right? So that's the technical side. The other side is really more of a business process component. In fact, I would say that in our experience, that's really the longer tail in terms of what it takes to build out these enterprise networks. Is the challenges around how do you set up and how do you determine what the governance will be for a network like this, where you have not only semi-trusted parties that you're participating with, but even in some cases, those parties could be competitors of one another. So they're going to be adversarial potentially at the get-go, coming together and just fundamentally agreeing that a shared source of truth for a business process to be automated amongst those parties seems obvious. Actually executing and building those contracts together and those agreements together is a very long tail. In addition to that, bringing other members into the network and having to then join and participate in the hosting, there's challenges there as well. But net, building these networks is hard to begin with. Scaling is even more difficult in the long term to get these networks to be, really realize their full envisioned potential, right? So if you go to the next slide, Mark. So we really focused on how do we first tackle that first challenge, right? Let's remove the challenge from the infrastructure setup perspective and make it easy for not only enterprises to build these networks out, but even to just start the journey of, hey, I have an idea. I want to build a proof of concept and see how this business workflow could be automated using blockchain and Solidity and automating those business workflows, right? So being able to get customers or businesses to be able to start very quickly, to start to model those smart contracts and those business flows, let's remove that infrastructure component. And that's really what Quorum Blockchain Service is all about, is automating that process, right? Just being able to not only stand a network up, whether it's a single member network just for that dev test component, but then scaling it is really critical. So QBS is built today inside of Azure, right? And it's really a follow-on from the work that Mark and I and the team did at Microsoft around Azure Blockchain Service. And where that really went from Microsoft's perspective, one of the challenges that we understood when we were in that house and managing Azure Blockchain Service and dealing with bringing customers in and working with the stack is that the challenge of owning a service where the core stack itself is separate from that service. In this case, it was initially with JP Morgan Chase, and then of course was purchased by Quorum, or purchased by ConsenSys. Quorum was there's this two-party component. And while Microsoft and ConsenSys have a very strong partnership and we had a very great line of sight into the work that was being done there, ultimately decided that it really made sense that the steward of the protocol itself, Quorum, really could bring forward a service to do that rather than Microsoft managing the separate infrastructure component of standing up Azure Blockchain Service and then ConsenSys being responsible for that stack. So Microsoft partnered with ConsenSys to bring forward a replacement for Azure Blockchain Service, which was Quorum Blockchain Service. So that history is important in the sense that if you're familiar at all with what Azure Blockchain Service was, Quorum Blockchain Service by definition was designed to be able to be as effectively a direct port, if you will, of Azure Blockchain Service from a customer perspective. So whether that is making sure that the APIs were not only compatible, but effectively the same APIs to interact with the service itself were there to make it very easy for those customers that were migrating over to be able to do so. And customers in that case included Microsoft themselves with Xbox and Singapore Airlines and several others that were standing up or had stood up blockchain consortiums inside of Azure Blockchain Service coming over to Quorum Blockchain Service. So as such, the way the service is set up, number one, if you're familiar at all with Microsoft Azure, they have a platform or a framework, I should say, called Azure Managed Applications, which allows third parties, in this case ConsenSys, to be able to bring forward a PaaS-like service inside of Azure without having to be inside of Microsoft to do so. So Quorum Blockchain Service leverages that, which gives customers that same PaaS experience that you would have with a first-party service from Microsoft, but gives ConsenSys, in this case, the ability to then manage the underlying infrastructure. So really, what does that mean? So managing that underlying infrastructure really means, from a customer standpoint, they don't have to worry about the stack, whether it's the underlying VMs that the nodes are running themselves, the Linux images that are on there, patching and updating those images, high availability, of course, the maintenance and patching of Quorum, et cetera. Like customers can provision the service and step back, let ConsenSys operate it from a DevOps perspective. Customers can then just focus on doing their development and building their smart contracts and their business workflows. So with that, there's really there's two levels of service that are provided, or I should say three actually. There's a dev test SKU, so it's a very low cost, simple way to get started. But then there are two enterprise or business focused SKUs that are really focused on production. And the core difference between those really are on the axis of support and the level of support that you would get. Because really, when you're in a dev test, your support requirements are more around, hey, how does this work, and how do I submit smart contracts? Whereas when you get into a production environment, really what you want is a lack of a better term, a single throat to choke in the event that there's an issue with the service, and ConsenSys is that. And in addition to that, the infrastructure that the service is built on, the types of VMs, as an example, are scaled as such so we can cost optimize for those dev test queues. But then in the business side, there's enough VM headroom and there's production SLAs on those VMs with performance needed to run the network and to do that, which of course would cost a little bit more, but that's what's needed for an enterprise network. So Mark, why don't you go to the next slide? Sorry. So really, when just standing up the network in and of itself is one thing, but really one of the areas, again, that's very bespoke about blockchain is, again, this need to be able to invite other parties to participate in that blockchain network itself. And that's one of the more challenging areas to build if you're actually building a network and self-hosting it yourself, is how do you then interconnect those nodes together such that they're on the same chain, they're the same versions of Quorum that are running. How do you maintain and manage that, really? We call that, in general, consortium management. And that's one of the core value props that's built into Quorum Blockchain Service, is the fact that all of that is simplified and elevated to the point where the experience is as simple as you can see on the screenshot. I can simply, in the provisioning process, I define, when I'm standing up the first blockchain network, I define a consortium. I give it a name, Jason's consortium. Then with that, after that I've stood that up, I have the ability to then invite other parties to join that consortium. So effectively a process that behind the hood sends an email with think of it as a token, if you will, that allows those members that when they then want to participate and join the network, they're able to provision, consume that token. It then, under the hood, magic happens, and ConsenSys automatically builds those nodes and connects those nodes together, right? So now they're a part of the same consortium. They share the same governance rules. They're on the same chain, right? And given that each party in the consortium will have their own transaction node, their own privacy manager, they can send private transactions to one another. Obviously, public state is federated across, as you would normally in Quorum as it is. But the goal is to take out the heavy lifting of what that consortium management is and inviting those members in, and then assigning the roles to those members, whether they are effectively, admins on the network themselves, have the ability to add other members or remove other members, or are they just participating in the network where they just need to send transactions. Okay. So that's the first, is that deploying and managing that consortium is really a core element. This slide here is really, this next component is really what I would talk about is the two-edged sword of a PaaS service. PaaS services in general make it very easy to use with a level of configuration and customization, but you don't get into the level of details to be able to twiddle every single configuration setting in the network. And that's by design, right? A PaaS service is designed such that we're covering the core configuration that's necessary to operate the network, but that it's consistent throughout all members that have joined in that network. Therefore, you don't have any bespoke implementations that could then throw off the performance or operation of the network itself. But you still want insight into what's happening under the hood. How are my nodes performing, right? Are my blockchain transactions processing, right? So we expose the ability to have that level of insight where you can, if you want to peer in and take a look at your transaction node, your validator node, what's the CPU percentage running, what's the memory pressure, you can do that. You don't need to worry about it, because if there are triggers or things that happen where those become a problem, we have automation that's built in to detect that and remediate those scenarios, but you still want to have that level of insight. So being able to expose the health of the network is an important element that customers are able to do. That's built into the service itself. And then lastly, the management operations in terms of being able to configure and get the details you need for the network. Once you stand it up, the next thing you need is, okay, I need a transaction node endpoint. I need an RPC endpoint to transact against. How do I get that? How do I configure the security of that node? How do I set up and rotate API keys, set firewall rules? And then once that's done, it's kind of a set and forget for the most part, turns into a maintenance mode. But then you can transact on the network, right? So that's all done through RESTful APIs that are published and that are easy to interact with. That will come to a user experience level at some point. But the goal is this is a set once, easy to do. Once it's done, it's a network that's run, that's set up and running. Your apps can interact with it, and just like you would any other network in and of itself. So before we jump into the next section, just really quick, and I don't see how to use the chat here, but a couple of things. If consensus.net/quorum/QBS is where you can get a little bit more detail about what Quorum Blockchain Service is. If you're interested in taking a look at it and being a part of it, there's a sign-up sheet there to be able to do that. I'll just, maybe we can post that in the notes afterwards. But with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Mark.
Thanks, Jason. So really eager to engage with the EA community. And so we're just going to wrap up with a couple of key takeaways. I think the things that we see consistently, no matter what the scenario is of the industry, it's about trust and transparency, whether it's your supply chain of your physical goods or your digital assets. In terms of the future, that future is converged. And so mainnet is a part of that, as well as a continuum of layer 2 networks and others. Enabling all developers is incredibly important, from the most hardcore protocol developer to the low code, no code person who has, Johnny and Supriya in accounting. They have some great ideas. And then, integration is key. And then, QBS is a solid foundation for your permission networks, and Pura is one for your public networks. When we look at ConsenSys, we are the #1 pure play blockchain platform. We talked about the platform that we deliver. We have a thoughtful portfolio, and we work with a lot of major customers that have provided trust. And the thing I like to say is ConsenSys has been here since the dawn of Ethereum, and so just the lessons learned accumulated in blockchain years is significant, and we bring that to the products and the people that we work with. So with that, we'd love to turn it over to Q&A. And Jack, you had a question of can we download a copy of the slides? I can work with the EA folks to make that available. Not a problem. Any other questions from the audience?
I have a question to get things going here. First of all, that was a fascinating presentation. Thank you. And something that you touched on, I'm wondering, what are the things that are important to look at when considering the concept of a world of connected chains? So, like, how should enterprises think about this world where more and more bridges come online and sort of bring about this birth of a network of many blockchains? I think you may have mentioned that layer 2s may play a role in that. Is that right? And if so, could you maybe go into that a little bit more?
Yeah, so I think, we're transitioning from a world that I think was one of or to one of and, right? And so it was a private network or mainnet. I think what we've seen with the explosions in DeFi and with NFT, we've seen layer 2 networks that have been able to deliver on the performance in terms of transactions per second, more predictable costs. That was a challenge for some folks. And so what we've had in parallel to that is we've had bridging technologies that enable them, so you can get all those benefits, and for the things that you want, you can go ahead and put them onto Ethereum mainnet, and almost in some cases use Ethereum mainnet as a settlement layer, which I think is going to become more and more popular for folks. Similarly, we've got rollups technology that provides a number of capabilities that can also have things rolled up on mainnet. And so the combination of those, you've got this great thing that technology has evolved to meet the moment. And the moment is one where everyone is just sort of pouring into this space, but they had concerns about those sorts of things. The other thing, and it's something we're working on at ConsenSys, is also finding that in a world of there's another category that's important, and that's a public permissioned networks, right? And so how can I do things with KYC? And so you'll see more things that are there. And the beauty is that now that we're sort of the general consensus is that we are going to be in this world of layered chains that are connected, that we can offer things that make sense for different scenarios as your entry point, but that doesn't exclude them from participating in mainnet or with other networks. And so really it will be these sets of networks that are coming together, which I think is going to be fascinating. You'll see a lot happening in that space this year. We're really excited about the interest that we're seeing there for sure. But the bridges and rollups combined with these layer twos is really opening up a whole new world of scenarios and making what was pushing things to private permissioned exclusively will now end up making it more of a continuum, which is exciting.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I see some more questions actually in the chat window. Are you guys able to see the chat window?
Yes.
Yeah, so someone asked a question about the considerations, right? And so these are these are considerations that probably are less about, they used to be public versus private, but now I think they're more public permissioned or public permissionless or private permissioned. And so for the things that we see people moving to private permissioned or public permissioned, it is really driven by sort of these three factors. I need to do private transactions. I really need to get control over transaction costs and have them be fairly predictable. Geography. In some situations, I can't have nodes running in North Korea, right? There's other situations where there's talk in some countries where the first write on the blockchain has to happen within their geographies, for example. Or I might want a network that's just for, say, like the European Union. And so those are things that people look at there. And then there are compliance considerations about where the nodes are running, performance transactions per second, and then do I know who's on the network? And that might be tied in with a bit with compliance. It also may be just about concerns of bad actors and liability and potential threats to the business that they're on. And generally, if you had requirements here, many times in the past, that basically pushed you to private permission. And so what's happening now is that this is now a continuum between private permissioned and public permissioned. And so the cases where for like a public permissioned, if I have like pooled resources that I want to have some level of control over, but I want to share. So it could be pooled resources. You could have like university degrees or other things like that, or one example that folks have used, or things that are sort of more in the public good there, or KYC scenarios. Private may be things where things need to be exclusively private and really don't want to have anything public on that at all. And then there are mixtures. So we talk about supply chain at the beginning. Jason and I worked with a really famous coffee company at our last employer. And, part of the story was about, they're managing their supply chain, but then it was also about, hey, how do we help that smallhold farmer get information and share that she actually sells coffee to us? Because that would allow her and her family to get better access to capital, which is better for her, which is better for our business, and those sorts of things. And so how do you selectively share information public and private? And that's where that bridging piece comes in really interesting for me as well. So a mixture there. So hopefully that answers your question. But this is the high level decision tree that folks look at. And then it's a question of what makes the most sense for you there. And do I want to run and manage a network, or do I want to have a managed network for me? And then, are these private or not? And so Jess asked, are your tokens ERC20 compatible? And so on this one, I'd be good to get a little bit more information on this. So if we look at sort of our connectors or our tools like Infura or with Truffle, you can develop ERC20 or ERC721 or really any smart contracts that you like. Similarly with Quorum Blockchain Service, you can deploy any contract there as well. The short answer is yes, but if there was a nuance to that question, definitely post a follow-up there, and would love to chat more about that. Oh, and then social media handles.
And we'll pop those in the chat. I want to make sure we answer Jess's other question. So she asked, how do you take a look at, or how do you compare, Quorum/QBS in comparison to like running Hyperledger Fabric or services like Kaleido? And it's a great question, because really, and it's really break this down into two. So if you can take a look at services like Kaleido, which are, Kaleido offers, several different protocols, right? So one of those being ConsenSys Quorum, as well as Hyperledger Besu, very similar in terms of a managed platform service, right? I would say one of the core differences there, and as well as running Hyperledger Fabric, whether it's self-hosted or in a managed service by another provider, is to Mark's point that ConsenSys has been around since the dawn of Ethereum, right? So taking that forward is, and those lessons learned are important. That helps inform us in terms of how we not only build services like QBS, but of course the entire portfolio. But the other core piece of that as well is this concept that we've landed here, or that folks are familiar with, of this world of connected chains, right? And really what we're seeing is gravitate forward, as Mark mentioned, is this idea that not only is ultimately connectivity to mainnet becoming more and more important, whether that's as a settlement layer or as the ability to not only bridge to mainnet, but to multiple other layer 2s and maybe potential layer 3s in a consistent ecosystem or consistent flow. Doing that in an EVM compatible manner really makes it much more flexible for what you're building. So if you're building on a EVM compatible network to begin with, all of that work is obviously going to be portable and easier to bridge and chain over to whether it's mainnet or other EVM compatible chains, which are really where the gravity is really focused, both in the enterprise, but also certainly in the public space, and what we're seeing in the gravity around NFTs and other various tokenomics that are happening across the network itself.
Yeah, I think just adding to that too is if you look at our approach, is if you believed in the world of multiple layered chains, then ideally the chains you're running in Kaleido can connect to what we have, and as well as with other providers. I think that one of the differences for ConsenSys is that if you look at what we've put together with Quorum and QBS, and with we've got for Infura for connecting to mainnet, is we understand that there's situations where you're going to want to run a network by yourself. You may want to have, in some situations, some customers want to have control over every knob and switch. In that case, a managed service is not for you, right? That really is having access to what you can deploy. In other cases, a managed service is great for you, and you can go ahead and leverage that. In other cases, you want to connect to Ethereum mainnet, and you just want super fast, reliable, scalable connectivity, which you'll get with Infura. And so if you look at from an Ethereum ecosystem perspective, you can target any of those or all of those, some of them now, and then easily move over in the future. And so we really take a holistic view in terms of how we're looking at this today, as well as investing in bridging technology and roll-up technology that you're not going to see in other providers there. But I think if I were to look at one differentiation between us and other folks there, it really is looking at that continuum. There was a question from Dennis. It says, do you have more no-code tools or platforms that allow people to test blockchain solutions without having coding experience? So great question, Dennis. For folks who haven't been tracking my career, and imagine a lot of folks haven't, between leading Azure Blockchain and then coming here, I actually went and launched something called Dataverse for Teams and spent a lot of time at Microsoft launching a low-code, no-code platform. And so, the first offerings we have are these connectors. The beauty of these connectors is they can bring low code to, and so it builds on investments that a lot of enterprises already have, right? And so what that means is that if you're in an enterprise that has Microsoft licenses, they also have free trials. You can take that connector and plug it into your own apps. You can work in a Fusion team to have someone who might build a front end for you for that. But you can also do low code, no code apps in Power Apps, which will get you on web and desktop and mobile apps, like without having to write code, right? It can also get you into chatbots. It can also get you into what they call these Power Automate flows. And so what these do, it allows you to do business logic that if this, then that thing you just saw, but it may send you an email or may send you a Slack message. And there's interactions with Slack or Teams or those sorts of things, new categories of applications that are coming too. And so those can all be done with low code, no code. Even on the data side, that connects them with something called Dataverse, which is where my old team was. And so that's going to allow you to get low code, no code access to data where you can design systems. Really, it's designed for people that are not professional coders, but is also provides the ability for people to work with people who are professional coders if you want to. So it really provides like the best of both worlds. And the thing to keep in mind there with low code, no code is, we were just showing deploying smart contracts and things like that. But you may just want to say, hey, when this smart contract comes in, go ahead and process this for me. And I can't underscore, one of the reasons why we started with the Microsoft Power Platform was just because, which also works with Logic Apps, by the way, it's the same engine under the covers, is because they have 400 other connectors. And so that really opens up a ton of scenarios that are incredibly important for the enterprise. We worked with one enterprise customer and they said, hey, you know what? Like, I really want to go all in, but here's the reality today. Like, I get an email attachment with an Excel spreadsheet from my supplier, and I need to get all that stuff into smart contracts. Like, basically every row in the sheet reflects a smart contract. And so using those our connector plus the other connectors that were available, you could have it listen to an email account. It will retrieve the email. It would retrieve the Excel file. It will iterate through all the rows and just start pumping out smart contracts for each of those onto their network. That was written in about 15 minutes, right? And so it's not just about low code, it's about productivity. Because I'm actually more than capable in doing pro code. I just found it's a funny story. Jason and I had a hackathon, and we saw this gentleman who was from the field organization who was just cranking out all these demos, and it was like amazingly fast. And then he showed us what it was, and we saw that people were able to do that pretty quickly, which is pretty wild. So you'll be able to develop with our connectors on that platform today, and we expect to go to other platforms in the future. And by the way, that also isn't just for Power Platform, it plugs into Office, so there's support in SharePoint. It also plugs into Dynamics. And so if you're in that ecosystem, it works quite well. And there also are connectors for Salesforce and SAP and other things like that, which are kind of interesting, but pretty powerful. But if you are interested in that, again, this is sort of a world premiere here at the EEA, because we know that this is where the enterprise cool kids hang out. If you'd like to get early access to that, please send an email to me at mark.mercuri@consensys.net, and we'd be happy to get you on the list for the preview for that. And it looks like, Jason, there was a question about Polynia, and so you've provided that link to folks. Oh, and then Jess, it's like, hey, from your perspective, when you are connecting chains, are you leveraging ConsenSys across the multiple chains, or just using the other chains as additional endpoints? It depends on how you go about it, but generally what you're doing is you might have a contract that's bridged across chains, or you may be doing a roll-up that's posting to a chain. But happy to chat more about that. I think that probably is worth a white paper just to talk about that, for folks to talk about that in more detail. Any other questions we can answer? We're just going back and see if we can answer anything. And by the way, on Twitter, I'm at Mark Mercuri. Jason, I'm not sure. We follow each other on Twitter, but I don't remember your handles off the top of my head. Yeah, Dennis, I'll go ahead and put my email in the chat.
I have another question. I'm wondering, when enterprises come to ConsenSys and they're interested in this service, is there any kind of consideration or overall theme you find that enterprises in general have not fully appreciated at the time they come to you? So, like, for example, is it challenges around governance, perhaps? I'm just wondering, have you noticed any kind of common theme that when enterprises come, it seems that usually they have not considered, something that's important?
Well, I'll touch on one thing, and Jason, I'm sure, has some others, is so you talked about governance, and one of the things we didn't talk about today, but is going to be really important in 2022, is this concept of DAOs, or decentralized autonomous organizations. And so if you think about spinning up your own network, one of the things that people don't spend as much time about is governance. And so the bad joke, and I'm a dad of 2 kids, so I have lots of bad dad jokes, is everyone focuses on getting married and no one focuses on getting divorced, right? And actually, that's probably I'm also a bad master of bad analogies. I probably shouldn't talk about my kids and divorce in the same sense. But anyways, the big thing there is that everyone focuses on getting together, but like, what happens if someone does business with North Korea, right? And it's like, okay, we can't do business anymore. So how does that work? And so we have to disconnect you from the network. Well, do I get an appeals process if I'm the party that's being kicked out? Like, what happens to the data? And like, who actually does the disconnection? Is it a third party that's going to go do that for me? So the good news is Jason and I have done lots of thinking about this and over multiple years. And so we know what those answers are, and we can help direct customers to some of those things. The nice thing is that what Jason and the team have put together really helps take some of the hard stuff out of it. Like, how do you like physically connect your networks and things like that? And then there's the, hey, I want to do this, where should I go? Like, and so they don't really know about like mainnet or private permissioned, or now public permission in between. And so those are just areas where we end up having sort of thoughtful conversations. And the other thing I would say is the integration question, which I think we demonstrated earlier. Is we've tried to make like incredibly easy, but it's one of those things. It's like understanding how I take my existing stuff and connect it to the new stuff, which is the same thing people saw in cloud. It was like, hey, we can go focus on the new things over there, but like, how do a lot of the value is to what I brought to the beginning. And then understanding trust across like the entire supply chain, as we talked about at the top of the call. That's a bit of a grab bag of stuff. Jason, do you want to talk more about like QBS in general and people spinning up networks?
Yeah, well, I'll just say one other point around the journey that at least I've witnessed, and Mark, I think you have as well, and I think a lot of the folks on the call have witnessed, and this has certainly been a journey of learnings over years from a customer perspective. But what we've seen, or what I've seen, is a lot of enterprises initially coming to blockchain. Really, what they want is they really want to be able to have increased trust and transparency across a business process, and they've early on equated that to, well, blockchain can do that because it's immutable across all parties. So they come and say, look, we want to do blockchain for this purpose, but they'll still come in with the idea that, hey, I want to build a supply chain network, as an example. And if you're a retailer whose store is on every corner across the United States, you're typically going to come in saying, I want to build the supply chain network, but they'll in many cases come in with a model of more of a centralized mindset. Hey, I'm the head of the supply chain, so I'm going to dictate how this goes. Or maybe it's myself and a couple of others that are a founder-led type consortium, but we're going to drive all of the rules, right? And what I think they've learned, and we've learned out of that over the past years, has been that in concept, that might be the way it works a lot of the ways today in a disconnected system environment. But in reality, where participants in these networks want to go is to more of a open, more of a decentralized model where, to some degree, all parties have, if you will, a vote or a say in the network themselves. And this is really where the concept of taking at least the framework or the concept of a DAO inside of a network and being able to have a level of distributed governance across the network is really super powerful. And it still allows the ability, or will allow the ability for a more of a centralized mindset, if that makes sense for that particular network. But really, ultimately, what you want, I think we all see the North Star that, are there 100 supply chain networks that exist in the world? Or there's thousands that exist today. But really, if you think about it from a blockchain network perspective, there's been this race to build supply chain networks. But really, should there be one or a set of supply chain networks that are really kind of targeted at a vertical sense, where you can have a single supply chain network for dairy products, as an example, or even food goods, right? That everybody gravitates towards. If you have a network such that everybody's onboarded to, it makes it easier to then fully scale and build that network out. But that requires this complex governance that I think has been a journey across the industry the past couple of years. And at least the concept, the model of DAOs really helps to, I think, equal that balance a bit. And that's an area that we're certainly investing in and looking at as we think about, augmenting and building out, both Quorum Blockchain Service, but also across the protocols and the tool sets that we have as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about what Jason was talking about earlier, like between Quorum and QBS. And so with Quorum, you've got a great technology, and I can deploy that and I can fully manage it because I want control over every knob and switch. And if you want super high control over, if you're overly particular about your governance, Like you can think about that as something where you want to have similar control. But then for QBS, like for 90% of people or more, having a managed service that hits all the key points is something that's going to be super interesting for them. And so if you could have a DAO that had a couple of different governance models in there, and you could say, I want chocolate, strawberry, or vanilla, whatever the flavor of governance that makes sense for you, like a DAO can actually help them go dramatically faster and handle a bunch of sort of the control issues that people have. The other thing that I would add is, understanding what people want to. The thing that I think everyone in the enterprise comes back with a default position of, I want to own this. I want to own node. Like, do you really want to own an Ethereum mainnet node, or do you just want super fast access, right? And so reality is most people just want super fast access. Just give me an API. And so like one of the things that with the Infura service that complements we have for QBS, but for public, like there's an API that you can have access to. And so I think that's the other thing too, is understanding like what's really important for you. I think in the new space, and a lot of my career has been in emerging tech. And so people always want to own the emerging tech because it's new and it's unknown. I think we're now at this level of maturity with where we are with blockchain, that people should really like, do you really need to own it? Like the thing is, and one of the reasons I came to ConsenSys, because they really had everything you needed end to end. And it's like, blockchain is going to help you innovate and change the way that you do business in positive ways, financially, globally, add more equity, that sort of thing. And any hour you spend on blockchain infrastructure is an hour you're not doing that, right? And so like ConsenSys can help provide that level of infrastructure so you can focus on that. Like people, talk to, whether it's Microsoft or Amazon or Google, they don't spin up their own servers 9 times out of 10 unless they need to have that fine-grained level of control over those. They're going to cloud providers because why? It's cheaper for them, and it's going to enable them to go and innovate much more quickly. I think we're going to see the same thing happening in the blockchain space too. And we're really just trying to enable that in a bunch of places. And I think the DAOs really on governance is going to help a lot.
Yeah, great. Thank you. It's great to hear about the potential application of DAOs there. So we're at time. I'd like to thank you both very much for being here today. This has been great, really terrific. And terrific service. Great to hear from you both at ConsenSys. And with that, I'd like to pass it back to Brittany.
Thank you. And thanks, Mark and Jason, for joining us today. And I noticed you did place your social media handles in the chat for all attendees to follow your work. For additional information about joining the EEA, please reach out to membership@eea-eth-alliance.org or visit our website. That's been posted in the chat for you. You can also follow the EEA on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Thank you, everyone. And this concludes today's EEA webinar.